Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the 29th edition of Time of the Writer. I'm very privileged to have in my presence three illustrious gentlemen from the performance, theatre, and music world, and our panel is a theatre of words. Because theatre itself is so ephemeral, and basically, you watch it and then it's gone, and that's both its beauty and its joy, but also its frustration, I think. But these three men have managed to capture the beauty of performance and what happens behind performances in books. And we're going to be discussing Imperfect Harmony by Kutlwano Masote, Being Bill by Peter Terry, and coming soon, we have a very lucky advanced reading, Soweto's Theatre of Resistance by Dr. Andile Xaba. And I'd like to open the floor by just asking each of you to tell me your first memory of a live performance that you attended. Where it can be music or theatre.
Can I go first because I'm the
Yes.
oldest?
Yes.
I was 6 years old, and my grandmother, bless her heart, took me and my brothers to the theatre to see a play called Listen to the Wind. It was in the Library Theatre, I think, in Johannesburg. It was a tiny theatre, but for a little boy, it was huge. And it was a children's play, obviously. And I still remember the feeling of complete magic when the first scene was these kids in a drawing room, such as it was, or a sitting room, and then by pure magic they were whisked away to an island, and I would imagine it was just actors moving flats, to change the scene. But for this little 6-year-old boy, it was pure magic, and I knew there and then that I wanted to be an actor. And for my sins, I've been an actor since 1972.
That's quite a lengthy period of time, Peter. Thanks so much for sharing that with us. Kutlwano?
Can I go? Or Kutlwano?
Yes, sure.
Okay, great. I'm not sure if it's the first memory, but it certainly is a memory. I grew up in Soweto, and of course in Soweto, there were no theatres then. The Soweto Theatre was recently opened. So we used to watch our plays at a place called A2 Cinema in Mfulo. And I'm sure it was a Gibson Kente play. And I just remember my father and us, because my father had been an actor. So he kept his interest in acting throughout his life. So he took us to see Gibson Kente's plays. So I just remember us as a family queuing to get into the A2 Cinema. There would be long queues of people, an hour or so before the performance starts. So the memory is actually of people around me just trying to get into the theater to see the play. I don't know which play it was, but I remember the feeling. I just remember the feeling of people around me, of people being excited, and of a feeling of community of people around me and queuing to get into A2 Cinema.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Kutlwano?
By contrast to both Andile and Peter, it's very hard to pin back a memory, an early one, of when those switches came on, because I was born into a thriving music environment at home. My father was a music educator and a performer, and started the Soweto Youth Orchestra back in the 60s. So I've always had music. I think it's something that I used to take for granted, that the privilege and the magic that has been described by both Peter and Andile of first being enchanted by the performing arts. So I do consider it a great privilege of my life, but music has always moved me. And whether it was singing in a children's choir or playing recorder in a recorder's ensemble as a 4-year-old, or learning the violin and eventually the cello, I feel like it was always around, and I can't imagine life without it.
Do you think that growing up in a family where there was like a kind of history of music and performance, were you going to be anything else than a musician and someone involved in music?
No, I think it was. I always knew it deep down, but as a child, we all wanted to be traffic cops at some point. Before traffic cops had sort of ancillary incomes on the side of the road. The whole allure of scooters and chasing down wrongdoers. But I think as soon as I had more mature thoughts and ambitions, I always knew. I have two siblings, neither of whom went on to become musicians. So it wasn't a given in that sense, just having grown up in this family. But I think I had a special relationship with music throughout my exposure to it.
And Kutlwano, you wear many hats. You're a performer, you're a conductor, you're a broadcaster. When you were putting the book together, did you want to specifically enhance any particular aspect of your career as a musician? Or because I think what I loved most about yours is it's not just a kind of personal history of your life with music, but very similar to Andile's book, is it kind of tells a history of South Africa as well in the background, but very much, told through your experience of living through your music. When you sat down to write the book, what was your main kind of aim when you were writing it?
Yeah. So I think what pushed me to write it, because I think it was a story that was always bubbling underneath because of and when you read the book, you realize some of the situation instances and the privileges of meeting and certain people and playing at these amazing venues in Europe, etc. I felt that I had to share that with others, especially my children, and I think they pushed me to write it because we could be sitting at dinner, we could be driving in a small town, and I'd say, "Oh, around this corner, there's going to be a lovely theater. We once played a concert," and they went, "Dad, we know you've told us the story before." So that pushed me. But you're quite right, Tracey. It is a little bit of a document, and it's the example I always make is, you can read textbooks and watch, tutorials on the Second World War. But if you really want to know what the Second World War, how it affected people, everyday people, perhaps read the Diary of Anne Frank and such writings. And it's a little bit of history, but as I traverse those days that we all know about.
Mm. And Andile, yours is really a history of theatre and a history of theatre in Soweto, but it also very much tells the story of South Africa, and particularly because it's from 1984 to 1994 and stops just on the brink of democracy. And I know that you developed it initially from your thesis, but what compelled you to turn the thesis into a book?
Sure. Similar to Kutlwano, I felt that, it was my story. It is a story of South African theatre, South Africa, but it's also my story because I've lived it, and working as an academic, I would go to, give a lecture somewhere, some university, and I talk about Gibson Kente, I talk about Mofulo Hall, I talk about the Donaldson Orlando community, and the kids would be like, "What?" So it was the thing that, the history was not really recorded. And where it was recorded, it was fragmented, and if you think of the playwrights, that I deal with, Gibson Kente, Maisha Maponya, and Matsimela Managa, each of them, didn't really have an archive, didn't really keep notes. And I just felt, I can't let this one go. This is my story. I've got to give it a voice somehow. And so I was able to do two things at once. I was able to do my PhD and to tell the South African story. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a very valuable contribution, not just to the theatre archive, but to South Africa's kind of cultural history archive as well. Peter, as the veteran in the group, your book spans a much earlier time frame. And you mentioned, how many years you spent in the theatre. And while your book is not true or might be true, or some of it may be true, but not about true people, as you say, I love the way you've blended fact and fiction and told, as Kutlwano was saying, is that the best way to understand history, I think, is to read a person's personal account of it. And I think you capture so well that, not that I was around at that time, but I just always got a sense of the arts institutions and what was happening behind the scenes. What compelled you to write this novel in the way that you did, and to kind of blend fact and fiction and kind of tell an oblique history of theatre, but a very real and very vivid and very visceral history of people in theatre?
Yeah, thank you, Tracey. I'd had this idea knocking around in my head for some time. I mean, for me, the sort of the core of the book is this middle-aged man's obsession with a much younger woman. That's where it started from. And during COVID, to coin a cliche, when we were all locked down, except for going to the studio where I would meet Kutlwano often enough, to the radio studio. But during lockdown, I had a lot of time on my hands, and I thought this is a good time to try and get it down, because I'd never had the courage or the self-belief to think that I could actually run a marathon, as opposed to, writing a play is a bit of a sprint. Writing poetry is also a bit of a sprint, but the stamina and the commitment and the dedication to actually force myself to sit down and know that I had to run at least 70,000 words before I hit the finishing post, So it was an exercise as much as anything, and I took my central idea, which was, as I say, the middle-aged man and the very much younger woman, not a child, not underage, I hasten to stress, but a woman in her early 20s, and the kind of obsession that a middle-aged man can develop for a much younger and more beautiful woman, and that was the central core. And then I thought, rather than research another environment, I thought, let me put it into the environment that I knew very well, because I was at the State Theatre for nearly 30 years, and I did, in fact, rise up from where I started, which was as an assistant stage manager. In 1972, and up to the point where I became the head of the drama department at the State Theatre in the 90s. And what I discovered, of course, on my journey through the theatre, from the early days in 1956, when my granny took me to the theatre and I decided I wanted to be an actor, to the time when I was working in the theatre, I realized that the theatre is not magic, not for the people who are making theatre, but is magic for people in the audience. And I still, as an audience member, I still get a sense of magic, which of course you never really have as an actor. But I placed it when I was middle-aged, which was when I was the head of the drama department. So I was very much in the bureaucracy stratum, if you like, of the theatre. I was no longer acting or directing or writing, but being a producer, being management, which is a kind of bureaucratic desert-scape. And that was during the late 90s, when the theatre, when the arts, when South Africa was going through the first stages of the transition from pre-94 to post-94, and how it affected the arts, which was quite political. We were under a lot of political pressure at the time for various reasons, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to just make theatre, which is what we had been doing up until, and yes, I know that there are many arguments about were we doing apartheid theatre, etc., but that's not what the book is about. But I set it in a time when there was this upheaval and change, and it was so. I mean, the theatre is really a backdrop to the story. as you, I think, would have seen in your reading of it. But obviously, the day-to-day running of the theatre and the kinds of political things that we were dealing with, and the issues of having black and white actors in the company, and all of those kinds of things are part of the if you like, the texture of the story. So it's certainly a book set very much in the theatre for most of the book, but it's not really about the politics of the time, other than the fact that it impinged upon one's daily life. And this man who I describe, who is very, very loosely based on me, because none of what happens in the book is factual. But I drew on my own experiences to give that character a sense of being in that environment at that time.
I mean, I think what you say is, so relevant, because it's, theatre, even if it's not about politics, there's always, it happens in the time and place that's around it, so it can't help but reflect it. And I think what really gives the book texture as well is that, there's several parts where it almost reads like a script, where the dialogue is written in a kind of script form.
Yeah, well, I do that on purpose, of course. Yeah.
And of course, because then you get to really, you hear the people speaking, I think, a lot more clearly than you would if it was just written as an ordinary novel. So I think that's what gives the people, makes the relationship so real. And so, you can almost, if you feel a bit guilty, like you're eavesdropping on them, I think, at most of the time.
Well, that's good. That's excellent. I like that. Yeah. But what I think I set out to do, when I realized, as I was writing, I thought, here's a storyline that I can use. And as it developed, it starts with a young black actor being accused of sexually harassing a young white actress, and was he guilty or wasn't he is never actually finally resolved. But by telling the story, I wasn't trying to pass a judgment on anybody, really. And so my character describes stories that I think the reader will.
We've lost you there, Peter. I think we've lost Peter, so I'm going to go across to you, Kutlwano. The people in your story are very, very real. And the fact that you invite us into your life and are so open and generous with your entire life, with your family, people you've met, your history, the way music has developed you and you've developed music, is so beautiful, and really I think such an important historical document for theatre and performance in South Africa. Could you tell me a little bit about when you began your journey and studying and you began traveling overseas? You speak a lot in the book about that kind of, the big difference from performing in South Africa and what it meant to be abroad and perform on international stages. Could you tell me a little bit about that and how your feeling South African in those contexts manifested for you?
Sure. I think when I eventually go off to the Menuhin Academy, the International Menuhin Music Academy in 1996, it's going from what was a very good conservatoire style university music department at Wits, classic, conservatoire performance and etc., to probably the best music school of its kind in the world. Sort of finishing school, when I got there, some of the people that were already teaching assistants were international competition winners. One had won second prize in the Queen Elizabeth violin competition, which is probably still the biggest violin competition in the world. The other, who mentored me, a fine cellist by the name of Stanimir Todorov, Bulgarian guy, had won fifth prize, and yes, it is a big deal, in the Rostropovich cello competition. and he was a recent laureate at that time. So I think I was 22 at the time. He must have been about 27, and he was my sort of cello teacher's assistant. I learned the cello teacher was Radu Aldulescu, legend, Romanian concert cellist and teacher. So it was that kind of big step up, and going from being a sort of overgrown fish in a medium-sized pond to being a tiny little goldfish in an ocean, and learning to swim in those currents. And speak a lot about that, the kind of loneliness, the displacement, learning to survive in an environment where my well-cultivated English was of very little use outside of the academy itself. I had to learn scraps of French. And of course, this is one of the things, as you allude to, Tracey, is I speak openly about, my imperfections, hence the Imperfect Harmonies is the title of the book. This is where my alcohol, my penchant for the bitter stuff really properly took hold of me as a young man. And while it's okay for young people to explore and live out these excesses as one does, I think it's something that I would deal with and struggle with for years to come, because I think I really sunk deep. It wasn't a depression. I would not characterize it at all as that, but it is akin to that, in that you're so displaced. You live in a tiny village where you don't see Black people for weeks on end, and so it's a physical displacement, and it's real in every possible way, and playing catch up and really trying to be on par, or at least to be competitive and stay in this institution, because it's not just good enough to get in. You've got to keep your place. If you don't do well at the end of the day in an exam, they say, well, there are 700 other people waiting to use this opportunity. So that was a big step up for me. But as I say, it was. I don't see it as a huge cost that it came at, but I think it also helped me to develop some survival skills, to toughen up. I speak of our head of music, Maestro Alberto Lisi, who was a very difficult taskmaster, but we survived. We still speak some of it about it. But not everyone survived, as you'll remember, Tracey. I mean, three of my colleagues from the time, all cellists, curiously, within 5 years of me having left the academy in 1998, had taken their own lives. So that's quite. I mean, it's still something that I find as really odd. I don't know if you found me again. I see the screen left.
Yes, yeah, back. Yeah. We lost you for a minute, but
maybe that's it's a bit of a mouthful, but hopefully I've shot out what you were looking for.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I mean, I'm glad that you mentioned that about the suicide, because I think it is something. I don't obviously have exact numbers, but it does seem to be that people who are artistic and creative, there's such an inner turmoil and tension, and in a strange kind of way, to make art, one kind of has to really dig deep into your soul, whether it's music, writing, or theatre. And I think that, sometimes that's not always an easy burden for people to carry. Andile, Kutlwano's, put his very personal story in the book, and you had access to, obviously, the archive of the Sowetan and interviews with people. Do you feel that you were able to really understand the personality and the personal lives of the playwrights that you cover in your book, Gibson, Kente, Matsamelo, Manaka, and Maisha Maponya? Did you have enough access to their records? Did you get a sense of who they were as people?
Yeah, most definitely. Thanks for the question. What helped me was that Gibson Kente, Gibson Kente was a generation older than Matsimelo Managa and Maisha Maponya. So, he was the guru, he was the father of Soweto theatre. But he was visible in Soweto, he was a big personality. We would see him, whether it's at the shop to buy amagwinya or, you know, a petrol station. He drove a BMW, you know, so which was very unusual for those days. And he had this crazy Americanized accent, you know, so he spoke in this like kind of stylized way whenever he was speaking, in fact, when he was speaking English or isiXhosa, you know, his home language. So he was always present. And also, you know, because he had died by the time I started writing, but he was always present in my memory. So I kept those memories of myself growing up in Soweto. And, you know, so that was part of me, I feel. But, you know, as I explained in the book, he didn't have an archive. I mean, his house was petrol bombed by the state, you know, so most of his plays were destroyed. And, you know, so I had to really build an archive from scratch, you know, on Gibson Kente. I had to, you know, interview people, read the Sowetan, you know, find people, family members, cast members, people who had been in his life, and use my own memories, of course, of growing up in Soweto, you know, which are part of the story. So with Matsimela Managa, he was a literary guy, and he was, you know, he wanted to have a literary tradition, you know, at Funda Center. And Funda Center was like kind of this kind of artistic, intellectual hub, you know, in Soweto during that time. But they were very small, you know, they didn't have any large following, but they had a very dedicated following in Soweto. And regarding Maisha Maponya, I actually met him, you know, before he died, and he was very generous in terms of giving me an interview. To the point that, you know, he donated his archives, you know, because he was also quite aware of the literary tradition, you know. In all of these playwrights, in their own way, they wanted to follow a literary tradition and not an oral tradition, you know, as we are used to, because, you know, they saw themselves as artists. They didn't see themselves as just telling stories for the fun of it, you know. They were professional people. So, so Maisha Maponya, you know, we have a project at UNISA called the South African Drama and Theatre Heritage Project. So he donated his archives to us, and then we interviewed him, and we documented all his plays and his letters and, you know, photographs. So it's a very nice archive, actually, for people wanting to, you know, to study Black consciousness theatre. So I feel that, you know, I had to build it up from scratch. You know, I had to eke out and pull out from the letters, from what I hear, you know, from their work. I mean, their work as, you know, people in theater, the dramas that they create, you know, the performances that they have, the music that they write, you know, is also part of who they are. So that's how you learn about people. Yeah. So I think that I was able to kind of piece together their personalities, their biographies, and, you know, their achievements, and maybe what they didn't achieve as well, because it's not a perfect story.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's always a challenge to, you know, to try and balance the personal and the academic, and try and, you know, pull out the stories that matter personally to them, but also, you know, how they you know, make meaning of theatre on a broader sense. Peter, Andile made mention of the Funda Center, and you were at the State Theatre. I'm going to bring it a little bit back to today, and we're looking at, you know, these cultural institutions in South Africa are quite beleaguered at the moment. And obviously, you know, institutions that were around in the 70s, 80s, and 90s in different communities. And as you made mention, Andile, the Soweto Theatre only opened in 2012. But even that, in, you know, however many years later, is also, you know, under a bone of contention with some artists. Do you, can you see how the kind of, you know, where institutions were in your day, and the role that the State Theatre played, and the role that the State Theatre is playing now. Can you see any different similarities or things that you think should change, support artists more?
Well, in very broad and general terms, I always felt that the structure, the infrastructure, the system, if you like, of the performing arts councils was a very good one, in the sense that you had drama, dance, music, orchestra, etc., all in one place, sharing resources and being well funded by the state, and with a strong administrative core, etc. I totally understand why the performing arts councils were abolished, because of the politics and the apartheid system that had been inherited, etc. I fully understand that. But I've always felt, rightly or wrongly, and it's something that I'm more than happy to debate and more than happy to be convinced that I'm wrong, but I've always felt that the system of a strong core for the performing arts was a good one, and that that kind of sharing of resources and physical resources, financial resources, etc., was a good way forward, even if it went from being, as it had been, let's be honest, totally white to totally black. That for me was not the issue, but that the kind of the baby was thrown out with the bathwater, so to speak. And I've always felt that since the early 2000s, really, or the late 90s, that the performing arts, and here I'm talking things like theatre and dance and not even opera so much as those kinds of performing arts, and probably music as well, have been fragmented, and I think not positively fragmented, and people seem to be scrambling around for funding, and you get the people who are living gypsy lives, going from festival to festival, and there's huge issues and controversy with the National Arts Council funding, and things like all of that stuff that went on at the Market Theatre a couple of years ago, which was embarrassing and shameful and a disgrace, as far as I'm concerned. That's a theatre like that, with that history and that kind of raison d'être, had turned into a pit of financial corruption, and all of those kinds of things. So yeah, I think that things have changed a lot. To be fair, having left the State Theatre and as a place of permanent employment, and gone freelance and doing all sorts of weird and wonderful and fascinating jobs, including filming a toilet cleaner commercial in Tokyo, and movies and television and all those kinds of things. My experience of the theatre is fairly distant. In fact, I mean, these days I'm just a part-time jobbing actor. When someone phones me and offers me an acting job, I'll take it. But I mean, as Kutlwano will know, I spent many years as a classical music radio presenter, which I wouldn't have done if I'd stayed in the theatre system, so to speak. So my life has been a lot more varied, a lot more interesting, a lot more precarious. I've even been in a TV reality show, So in a way, I'm glad to get out of the State Theatre, and I think that shows in my novel to a certain extent as well. But am I worried about the state of the performing arts in this country? Yes, very. And I would imagine Andile probably knows a lot more about the nuts and bolts of kinds of theatre that I don't get to see, to be completely frank, and how healthy or how unhealthy it all is. By way of a completely irrelevant aside, I just want to say that listening to Kutlwano, a very dear friend and colleague from Classic 1027 days, he once told me the story of how when he was in Italy, his name was pronounced as Masote. He was Signor Masote. And you may have noticed in my book, my novel, that the fellow who's in charge of the orchestra, whose name was Louis Mostert, was calling himself Ludovico Masote,
Masote, yeah.
very pretentiously. And so thank
Illusions
you,
of grandeur.
Kutlwano. You have, in a funny way, you've been included in my novel.
Love it, Peter.
Kutlwano, you've having, studied internationally and having an input into development of music in South Africa. And Andile, this question is to you as well, that in a way, early community theatre of the oppressed, the early days of theatre in South Africa before 1994, in a strange kind of way, that theatre kind of thrived despite, the government trying by all means possible to oppress it. And there's something that comes through in the texture of the plays that were written in that time, a kind of resilience and a brutal honesty about how life was being experienced by people. Do you think that there's yes, obviously funding is in a huge crisis, I think, for the arts, not just in South Africa but all the way around the world, that there's something about that so-called poor theatre, but it is poor theatre that gives an element to the work that isn't there when it's very well funded. And that question's to both of you, both in terms of music and how people kind of thrive in a cauldron of fire.
Yeah, thanks. I'll jump in quickly. Absolutely. I mean, I think there is a charm to it, and there is it has a texture, a feel, and a certain kind of almost spirituality to it because of what it reflects, which are obviously ideals that we all agree are just and noble. However, we are not living in apartheid South Africa anymore, and the part of the promise of a free South Africa is the facility and the framework and policies and the funds and the acknowledgement and the respect and the honoring of artistic talent and the energy that go into it, into creating beautiful music, beautiful theater, that you will be rewarded because and your value will be acknowledged, and that's where we've missed each other. I mean, Peter, you lament the state of things. I do it in my book. Peter and I, were part of a classic FM that just evaporated, and I think I call it where prophets trump tradition. I was part of the National Symphony Orchestra that closed down in 2000, as Peter was at the State Theatre. And the reality is it's so difficult to restart these traditions and these institutions once you let them close down. I was part of the Samuel Foundation, also being closed down in 2020, which was a sort of CSI wing of the Royalty Collection Society, but whose raison d'etre was to look after education, cultural, and social programs of the creative arts, funding Durban Music School, commissioning composers, all of which that funding pool has disappeared. So while, like Peter says, it encourages us to be more maverick and to think on our feet, I also would never have found radio, or certainly have continued as a broadcaster. I had the orchestra not closed down. I write, I conduct, I do all manner of things because I realize that there is a vacuum. There's no institution or very few institutions to plug into and practice my craft. And therefore I have to run my artistry as a business. And that further fragmented because, I want to get out of it what I want to while contributing. And it might not be, when there's 5 or 6 of us doing that, it might not be in concert and it might not ultimately be for the greater good. And so that you find a lot of cliques, and that's why we're known as being fragmented. You guys fight with each other. We don't know who to fund. And, once that becomes a practice for a generation, it's very difficult to get people back into institutions because I run a thriving business. Why would I want to go back to a state theatre.
Yeah, I hear you. Andile, do you have any contribution to that?
I feel that we've lost the the memory. Apartheid was a very artificial situation. Let's just start there, because you had performing arts councils purely for the use of white actors and only for minority of white actors at that. So it was a very artificial situation and unsustainable, which is why it collapsed. It collapsed because it was unsustainable. You could never have, that level of support if you are democratic, if you are wanting to reach as many people as you can. I think that it was a good system, the performing arts councils, if only we had, so much money in this country to fund everyone and everything. And you go to New York right now, you never have, everybody's complaining about funding. And this is the richest country in the world.
Mm.
This is where, you have people, endowments that fund the arts. So, you can't say that the institutions that we had under apartheid can work now, because it's just a different time for everyone. And I think that there's people that are doing really good work. I mean, if you go to the Soweto Theatre, they have young dramatists who are from the township, who are writing plays about what is happening now. So there isn't enough money for the arts, and there will never be. This is the thing. I think that for a country like ours, which is a third world country, if you want to use that terminology, we'll never have enough money for the arts. And I think that the institutions that we have do need to be bolstered, do need to be transparent, and do need to function well. They do need to respond, to the needs of the community that they purport to serve. But I think for me to say that, the arts are, maybe it's because I'm not working as an artist, right? So I'm working as an academic. So I understand that, there's a kind of a distance, for me. But, I mean, what the State Theatre does is they also have a program, an outreach program. The Market Theatre has an outreach program. At the Sowetan Theatre, they've got an outreach program, and these kids are writing plays about what's affecting their lives, about gender, about violence, and about the beauty of being a young person. So we just don't know about them. I think that's that's one of the things that there's this big disjuncture about what is prominent and what is not prominent. So I just think that we, for a long time, I think that we kind of want to create a situation where it's us and them, whereas actually if we kind of try to be more collaborative, I think that is the only way that that the arts will thrive. I mean, but this is an idealist view. I understand, because we need to get somebody to make it happen for us. Yeah.
Can I jump in there? Because I find what Andile is saying very interesting, and that is the performing arts, I think, in any country, and certainly in this country, is an ecosystem. And in as much as you need the Market Theatre and the Joburg Theatre and the Soweto Theatre, you also need the Peter Turin Theatre, and you also need Daphne's Theatre on the Square and so on, and you need the youngsters and the outreach programs. They're all part of an ecosystem for me. And I think, as with any ecosystem, if you take out a chunk of that ecosystem and make it extinct, the whole ecosystem suffers. And I mean, I'm not trying to solve the problems in a couple of sentences, but I mean, one of the benefits that the Performing Arts Council system had, and again, I'm talking mostly white, yes, but from the 80s onwards, there were an increasing number of black actors in our company. But that's beside the point. But the Performing Arts Councils in Transvaal, Cape, Free State, etc., were training grounds. They were very valuable training grounds. And most of the senior people in our theatre profession these days would have at some point gone through and not just actors, but technicians as well, would have gone through the Performing Arts Council system. So, I mean, for me, that was also a part of what the value was. I'm not sure, because I'm ignorant here. I'm not sure whether things like the State Theatre as it is in its current iteration is doing the same things. Again, what I read, which is very much on the periphery, but what I read about a place like the State Theatre is that it's also a bit of a playground for a couple of important people, and I'm not quite sure how much development of the industry and of the artists and so on is happening. But I mean, that's where it should be happening. But now we're all getting perhaps a little political, and I'm not sure if politics is primarily where we should be.
Art is political. I think that we can't separate art from the lived experience of people. And I think that Gibson Kente was training people in Soweto. Michael Masote was training people in Soweto. Matsimela Manag was training people in Soweto, so there is a lot.
But without many resources, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think the tragedy is that you're right, it is an ecosystem, but it's that we have lost that. What was happening in Soweto is no longer happening now in terms of the training of young people, and to the extent that it was. But I think that it's not just a sort of like a one-sided story. I think that we just need to really grow what we have and build upon it. What happened after 1994 is that there was an exodus of artists from Soweto. People that were working and living and working in Soweto, training, and they just left. Why? Because they were poached by the performing arts councils, and they had opportunity to work at the Market Theatre, at Cape and at Bloemfontein. So it was an opportunity, but then the township lost, vital talent. They lost people who are economically active, as well as people migrated from the township and into the suburbs and town and that type of, and they were right to do that, but the people were really, really impoverished. And I think that we need to look at finding ways of how do we build then these institutions and make strong institutions in Soweto, in Gugulethu, in all the township in Mamelodi, so that these institutions that can feed into the State Theatre.
And of course,
coming us.
I think Andile,
what then happened as a.
Sorry, carry on, Peter.
No, I was just going to say that the people who were drained out of Soweto into the bigger professional theatres were then all gobbled up by the television soaps, and I mean, let's face it, the soaps have given a lot of people a lot of work. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it seems we've lost Andile. I hope he's going to be joining us again shortly. But I think there is a very thriving ecosystem in speaking about the township communities in Cape Town, where there are both performing arts theatres and people that are training. So I think it's just about, you mentioned about the kind of exposure that people get. And I think, perhaps Kutlwano, I don't know if you think that, where music has an advantage over theatre, that I mean, theatre, let's be honest, and this again applies all over the world. The audience attendance for theatre is, really diminished compared to, minimal compared to what like music is. There's far more people that will listen to a music concert than what will come to a theatre performance. Do you think that we're doing enough to cultivate audiences on the music side? I mean, you came from a very musical family, so for you were kind of born into music. But for people who aren't, do you think there's enough opportunities for them to experience, both classical and contemporary music?
Yeah, I mean, so every time there is a new jazz venue in Johannesburg, we all get excited. And then they hardly last 2 or 3 years and then they're gone. Just this morning, we were talking about Hughes and Brampton. Can't wait to go. They only open on a Thursday, so I have to find a Thursday where things are lined. So I think the whole economics of it, I guess, and this relates slightly to theatre in this instant, that it's, it has to, there's far more curation that has to go into staging a theatrical production. Where music, you could say, let's meet at place X, bring your saxophone, I'll bring a keyboard, so and so will bring the sound, and off you go. We can just jam. And there are lots of those kinds of places. There are restaurants that offer that. So music, yes, is a little bit, more, it's less cumbersome to put on a production. And if you just keep scaling that up to concerts or maybe symphony concerts, I think they're still in quite inaccessible places, city halls and Linda auditoriums and places like that, which, you need a car to go to because it happens at night. And if you live, further from suburbia, it's something that needs better planning. This past weekend, we attended the Starlight Classics concert, which is sponsored by one of the private banks. Fantastic, full. They do it once a year in Johannesburg, once a year in Cape Town, and that's really glossy. I mean, it was amazing, and so coming back. So it was in Cape Town. Coming back last night on the flight, there were at least 3 other families that had attended and had gone specifically for it. So those things have their own audiences. And I guess they have a different appeal. Some of them are by invitation, of course, because it's bankers entertaining clients, etc. But I think on the whole, we are doing enough to create dialogues between the various music traditions. And this is a space that I've played in quite a bit, and I talk about it in the book. I think I call it 2 chapters called making the circle bigger, and also adding my own vocab to the lexicon. This refers to, of course, orchestrating all these main artists' music, and when they have shows, we plug into. I also work on a project called Classics on Turf, where we literally play at the end of a golf day. We stage a concert. So these are new town halls, golf courses. These are new concert venues, they are boardrooms, because the town halls happen to be in places where people like me don't necessarily want to visit at night. So it's just about that, finding the new spaces, and also bringing in new offerings, creating dialogues between an opera singer and a jazz pianist, to say, guys, F major will always be F major. Let's talk about how then we can create new. Of course, it needs thought and it needs curation, but audiences also are expecting something new. I mean, just being the curator of this one concert series, Classics on Turf, I get WhatsApps on a daily basis from the rest of the team. Have you thought about pairing this one with that one? Because people are looking for new products, and I think that's where our successes, perhaps even as theatre practitioners, lie in, and just being savvy in the way that we package our offerings.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one that the big benefit that both music and theatre and all live performance have is that AI is coming for everyone else, but it really can't. There is one thing that AI, in my opinion, will never be able to do, and that's to create that magic of live performance, that interaction between audience members, and people on the stage, and just that absolutely just blissful, exquisite feeling that you've all described, feeling when you first saw your first performances. I know we're going to.
That if I can quickly
Yes.
butt in there for 30 seconds. We have, as part of Classics on Turf, a feature because it's sponsored by Telkom, the concert series, and they being a tech company where attendees get a QR code on their phone at the beginning of the concert, and they answer 5 or 6 questions, multiple choice, and it gets fed into an algorithm or software or a program that then churns out sheet music, which we perform, a 3-minute piece. We've done it 3 times.
Wow.
I'll share the link to the video with you
Yes,
guys.
please do.
But where I agree with you, it will never replace that transientness of it all. The fact that we make mistakes on stage or we write the wrong note and we don't change it. It's perfect as it is. And you can't teach that. Even if you try and teach it, it will be so predictive and it will be so preset,
Yeah. I mean, I do think there's nothing like the magic of live performance in theatre. I mean, I'm a bit biased towards theatre. So as we head towards a close, I just wanted to ask, Peter, when they do make either the stage play or the movie of your book, who would you like to play the lead characters?
I think Brad Pitt should play the lead character. No,
and Vanessa?
Seriously, well, I still want to turn it into an audiobook. And I think even turning it into an audiobook will be a challenge because of the way it's written with diary extracts and bits of dialogue and all of those kinds of things. I mean, it really is. It's not a totally straightforward novel. It kind of goes to all sorts of places. Could it be a movie? Yeah. Who would play Vanessa? A young goddess. But certainly the next book that's percolating in my head at the moment has got nothing to do with the theatre. It's got nothing to do with me. It's got nothing to do with obsessive love. It's something totally different, and I'm really getting quite nervous about starting it. But this first novel, and I think it's true of all first novels, is that there's a certain amount of autobiography that goes into it, as I say, when I created Vanessa, I just saw a beautiful golden blonde angel, and I have no specific face in mind, So I don't know who would play her, but are you available, Tracey?
No, definitely not. I'm definitely a full-time audience member, definitely on the other side of the stage. And Andile, what I love about your book is, the way the memory studies and the, theatre, for me, theatre and memory, the kind of combination of the remembering a performance after you've seen it, but also the way theatre creates memories. It's just such a lovely way you've woven through the book. And I just wanted to know from you, is there one memory during your research and during your writing that you came across that you'll hold dear forever?
Oh, there's several, but the one is, I did my research at the Johannesburg Library, and it was just nearly being locked into the into the library. All the archives are on the basement, and the people are working upstairs, and I'm busy there, working the archive and engrossed in it, and I look up and I see, oh my goodness, it's a Friday, and it's 5 o'clock, and and I sprint upstairs because I'll be locked in the library. So it has nothing to do with, it's kind of related to memory.
Yes.
But the idea that theatre is fleeting, but it also stays with us. Hey,
it's definitely.
The plays that I've seen are just so important, whether it's Angels in America or one of Gibson Kenter's plays, whatever, a performance. When you see a good actor on stage or a good, female actor, male actor, they kind of embody this character, and the character stays with you, and it becomes part of you in a way. So you kind of remember it, and it stays on. And it resonates, in other areas of your life. So that's the beauty of theatre for me. Yeah,
definitely. And Kutlwano, I know you've met very many famous people and played with them and performed with them and for them. Which has been your most memorable encounter with a well-known, famous musician, composer?
Without a doubt, is the one, greatest violinist of the 20th century, and a humanitarian, and my musical ancestor, I call him my grandfather, and it was a privilege to get to meet him several times actually, and yeah, just a wonderful man.
That's a beautiful way to end. I just want to thank you, all three of you, for writing these really exceptional books. I mean, they all, inspired me in different ways. I think I'll have to definitely watch more classical concerts so I can really understand the essence of an imperfect harmony. Andile, your book is such a valuable addition to the theatre archive, which I think is woefully neglected in this country. And being Bill, Peter, these characters are just so, when you put down a book and you wonder what's happened to people, I think that's the sign of characters that are really, fully fledged and kind of live on in your memory. So thank you to all three of you for writing the books and for what you do for the arts, for music, for theatre, for radio, for academia, and for keeping the arts and culture alive in South Africa. It's the only thing that's going to save us and the world. So please carry on doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you, Tracey.
Really appreciate taking the time and the effort to read all these books and then
It was a pleasure.
analyze all that information and have a very intelligent conversation with us, which is just so warm and so resonant. And thank you so much.
Yeah.
for
Thank
taking
you, Andile. Thank
Indeed.
you.
Thank you, Tracey.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andile and
Thanks.
Peter.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye.